and welcome to this week's Tech Talks. And today we have Justin Gordon, who is the CEO and founder of Friends and Guests, which we just talked about. That's not what he's going to talk about today. He's going to talk about a combination of React and Rails called React and Rails. Well, with that, please start, Justin.
Okay. Everybody, microphone's good level? Okay, perfect. Put this a little closer here. Anyway, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. Reason why I'm here is the guy, Chad Woolley. He got to know the React on Rails project very early on, and he's been a very active member of our community. And I said, hey, I want to go give the talk at a few places around the US and warm up for my talk coming up in a couple weeks at GoRuCo in New York City. So the topic of my talk today is React on Rails. I'm going to guess that probably most of you here have heard of the gem by this point. And so it's been a journey since 2014 when I got started on developing, what eventually became this gem. So let's the purpose, kind of the overlying theme of the talk is developer happiness. Like, how did I end up going about making this gem that now actually I've achieved a minor amount of open source fame with, over 3,000 stars, and I think like close to 400,000 downloads. We've got both it's an NPM and a Ruby gem version. So, what caused all this? How did I go down this path? Let's go back to 2014. In 2014 is a little bit of a different world than today. We're pretty happy doing Rails apps, and so why is Rails happiness? Some of you may have seen this Rails Doctrine. How many of you have seen the Rails Doctrine article? Only Michael. Okay. Anyway, here's a bunch of concepts. Like David wrote about this maybe a year ago or so, and these are the concepts for what are the underlying principles that have gone into Ruby on Rails over the last, I'm not even sure how many years, quite a few years, and it's obvious. I think it's probably got by far the biggest following for any web development framework ever. Would you say? I would say it's definitely one of the most popular. Michael, is it the most popular? I don't know. I like it. I used to do Java development with all those crazy libraries I can't even remember, with crazy XML configurations, things like that. Anyway, when I found the Rails community, the Ruby community, this was just pretty cool. So I'm gonna talk about these later on, about the Rails Doctrine, and we're gonna make sure that what we put into React on Rails, it kind of fits in the whole paradigm for designing Rails. Hey, simple jQuery on Rails, and this was like basically happy development for doing some simple jQuery type stuff. Michael might recognize this example. This is straight from the Rails tutorial. This is an example of using just bringing up an alert message. This is a little sprinkle of JavaScript. You directly bind to some DOM element, and this is what we did back 5 years ago, and this was acceptable. Is it still acceptable for a new web app these days? Not really. Okay, so this is the app my company's working on, Friends and Guests. Imagine if we tried to do this in jQuery. How much fun would that be? Probably not. Okay, so that is sadness to try doing that. So, React is happiness for building these front ends. I'm not going to go into all the reasons why that React is happiness, but I will say just because there's just, a lot of people are using it these days. For me personally, when I first started getting into React, the thing that really hit me was the talks by Pete Hunt, and the design of it was just so clear in terms of the way we were doing UIs before with the jQuery stuff, where you would manipulate the DOM was basically this giant global variable that you just keep mucking around with, and you just never knew what was going on. Like, how in the world did we get to that state, etc.? Whereas with React, it came up with this whole concept where the data flowed only in one direction, unidirectional data flow, where you had this and that was very much actually like why the old school Rails apps made a lot of sense. You had a request from the client, from the browser, Rails sends back some stuff, right? It's understandable. You know, someone submits a form, goes back to the server, you send back something. And we finally got that model in React with the virtual DOM. And it's probably about the, you know, there's a whole lot of other parts of the design of it were great. The other thing actually I will say about nowadays about React, if you're still not sure about it, is React Native. The fact you can build native apps using the same framework is definitely a superpower. I know some people are, you know, actually some pivotal people I've heard, you know, using Elm and stuff like that. I think I have not had a chance to look into those, but I am doing, we're doing React Native apps at Chaka Code also. And we're doing, so it's just, yeah. So I see people here that nodded, they've done some React Native. It's pretty awesome, especially if you've done regular other types of development. So, 2014, I got to build an app. I'm going to use React. I'm going to, you know, use it with Rails. So I go and I find the React Rails gem. It's from the React JS like organization. Sounds quite official. So what, you know, is the React Rails gem? Okay, let's see how this goes. Actually, one of the things I was doing with my consulting business was I try to write little tutorials, blog posts, etc., about whatever I'm learning about. This was published by Hackhands. I wrote a nice little tutorial about this. This is July 2014. And so here are the problems that I had with React Rails. Is ACID pipeline based. I didn't really know it was a problem at the time, but it quickly became a problem. React came with the React Rails gem embedded inside the gem. How many of you still think it's a good idea to embed JavaScript libraries inside of Ruby gems? Probably not. And then this was the next big one. Okay, I want to get some of these other, you know, I'm reading about React. I'm seeing there's all these other libraries go with it. How do I get this library into my Rails project with React Rails? Well, should I make another gem to encapsulate this JavaScript library? Maybe not. How about copy and paste into the vendor directory? Have any of you ever done that before? Now, when you get all this copy-pasted JavaScript code in the vendor directory, do you know if any of your teammates have modified that code? Maybe yes, maybe no. It's not fun, I don't think. It's not the right way to do it. Next thing was that, you know, CoffeeScript and CoffeeScript versus JavaScript. Back in 2014, I think most of the Rails world was on CoffeeScript, but there were some inklings that we were going to start moving to JavaScript. The Discourse project, I kind of looked at that one as a good example of a newer type of app back in 2014. It was pretty clear. Yehuda Katz brought up, you know, he got them to switch over from CoffeeScript to JavaScript. It's a really big change. And I looked into the discussion, and it was pretty clear the world was moving over toward JavaScript. The other thing was that when you're looking at all the examples of using React, what if you're just used to using CoffeeScript? How easy is it to read those examples? It's like reading Chinese, kind of, right? And you don't speak Chinese. So, you know, so I start getting into this. I start looking into the ES6 stuff, start learning about it. I realize, okay, I really want to be doing ES6. But React Rails at the time wasn't set up to be using Babel or, you know, whatever way, it, you know, we eventually got to doing that. So it was just a real bummer. So I was just going, God, this is just not really working the way I want to work. The other thing was that back in those days as well, is that before we started using the more modern JavaScript, what did we do? Everything was just global. You just, you know, all your stuff in your Rails apps just global, you know, global namespace. We weren't using modules. So that was pretty yucky. So here's like an example of someone that thought it was a good idea to make a Rails wrapper for JavaScript. Here's an example of I just found a random open source project, lots and lots of a bunch of big files copied into, the vendor.
Say something?
Hello, hello. Yay. All right. Thanks. Let's see. Okay, so here's some interesting slides. Trying to make this a little bit amusing, but the main thing, Drive with these NPM libraries and with Ruby, with Ruby gems, stuff like that is just, it's just absolute madness when I look back on what it was in those days. So yeah, no copying and pasting anymore. No one will do that. Now we got all this stuff. So I kind of, there's a little thing. It's like all of a sudden, this is the way it felt. It was like Christmas time in the JavaScript world, because before it was like nothing you could use, and you realize there's so much front-end stuff you could use. And this was just like invisible as a Rails developer, 5 years ago. I realized that there was just a world way beyond just the Ruby gems that we all had to get into to be doing modern Rails development. Little thing about run with the herd. It's kind of one of the philosophies we have about happiness in open source is that if all your examples are in ES6, stop writing CoffeeScript. I think it's not really that controversial anymore. But in 2014, this actually was in the Rails world. So I do like ES6. Rails world's come around to this. So Webpack. So we're trying to figure out, what's the solution to get around the React Rails gem. Pete Hunt, friend of a friend, he actually recommended, hey, check out Webpack. We really like it at Facebook and Instagram. It's really pretty new at the time in 2014. So I started looking into that, managed to find one little article, showed how to do it in Rails, and that was enough, and I realized that, cool, I could do it. And it was a really simple concept. Just basically, I'd put all my JavaScript in a directory, use Webpack, and it would take all this stuff and just make one file. I go, well, cool, I got one file. I just need to put that one file through the asset pipeline. I'm good to go. That was really it. That was the whole, beginnings of the concept of the React on Rails gem. Once I realized I could do that, I was like, bing, okay, this is so much better. Because with Webpack, then I'm getting Babel, getting NPM, getting all the good stuff I needed. This diagram actually here shows you it even goes to the front-end assets as well. So you're getting a lot of cool stuff like regarding CSS, especially using CSS modules. The other thing too was integration with all the other great front-end tooling like ESLand. Now we've got the prettier thing as well. So I wrote about this article on how to do all this stuff here. And this was back in 2014, and this actually I think was pretty well recognized at the time for being the leading reference on how to do this stuff. The article went with a open source example, showed exactly how to set all this stuff up, and I thought that would just be enough for the world, Well, why do you need more than just an example and you set all that stuff up, right? Well, some people didn't think it was good enough out there, and it was just too much work to copy and paste all this stuff and get going and kind of follow all these little templates and this basically a big recipe. People don't really want the recipe. They want to run one command. And this was the really big thing was there was no server rendering. So I didn't really understand, like, what was the deal with server rendering. So back then, especially 2014, 2015, why did it matter for server rendering? Why did server rendering matter? There's two main reasons. Anybody want to say why does server rendering matter?
Search engine indexing.
Exactly, search engine indexing. And the reason why is that the search engines like it if a page just loads, they could just boom index it, rather than having to run JavaScript, especially several years ago. It may not be as much of an issue anymore. The other thing is that if someone is, when you're looking at the performance of client-side performance of a web app, and the app just, boom, comes up right on the screen for you, and you can start reading it, but maybe you can't click on anything, is that better than just maybe a spinning ball while you don't see anything? And that's the whole concept of server rendering, is just show somebody something they can start looking at, but it may take a few seconds for the JavaScript to fully run. And this was something built into React back in, right from the get-go. So when I started learning about it, the reason why it wasn't a problem for me was that the project I was working on was more of an enterprise app, required a login, no SEO, and we didn't need server rendering. So my example app was just fine for that. But I like challenges, so I figured, hey, you know what? And let's see what we can do. So one of the things about, Ruby on Rails is kind of this philosophy, pretty much stuff just works. I mean, it really does. So I started working on the React on Rails gem. I looked back at my commit history. My first commit was August 16th, 2015. So we're coming up on 2 years. So let's give like a little example of this thing. I got this slide here. I'm not sure. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this a little bit later, this whole idea of simplicity of, the design of the gem. But it's interesting because different people have different ideas of what's simple versus what's not simple. And I've been getting into kind of some disagreements with the WebbPacker kind of group that's setting up this WebbPacker gem, which is the official version of Rails integration with Webpack. So I'll talk a little more about that later. So with React on Rails, there's a few very simple concepts to React on Rails that go into the happiness thing. So all the client-side files go under your client directory. We provide recommendations for what goes under client, but we don't enforce them, meaning it's like under client, that's your JavaScript app. Really, we don't mess with that at all. And do whatever you want, because we're not smart enough to know how the JavaScript world is going to be changing and how you want to use it. So there's a couple, the only other things that we require are, and this is with the new version of React on Rails version 8, which just came out, which has support for WebbPacker Lite, a lightweight version of WebbPacker. And that is, you have to create a manifest file. The manifest file, the purpose of the manifest is to say, hey, if I call this my client bundle, my client set of JavaScript, then the actual real thing that's deployed is like client bundle dash, a bunch of gobbledygook, unique fingerprint. And then there's some simple configuration files that basically tell Rails and the JavaScript where things are. And that's it. So the key features, here's a few of the key features that React on Rails gives you. Super simple server rendering, RSpec integration, localization, full Redux integration. So another aspect of, why would you use the React on Rails gem versus, you could just build a Rails API and then deploy your own server and stuff like that. It's, one thing is a lot more work. You're going to have to kind of deal with a lot more different configuration stuff. There's no need to migrate all of your app at once. The way I kind of look at these JavaScript apps and these React on Rails apps is that you have a bunch of single page apps within like a bigger app, and you don't want to migrate the whole thing all at once. And you can do something like, we're coming across, like Shaka Code is getting involved in a lot of projects that have Angular 1, and they want to convert their Angular 1 over to React. So this way we don't have to convert the whole app at once. I think all of you know why it's not a good idea to convert a whole giant app at once. it makes for a lot of unhappiness when the schedule doesn't meet the goals. In terms of, there's this concept in that Rails doctrine of omakase. I sort of picked early on, this was my chef selection, was Webpack and React. And I think luckily those were good decisions initially. Early on also, I picked very close support for React Router, Redux. We even recently support like React Helmet and React I18N, so you can use your same Ruby config files for internationalization. It works with your React stuff as well, which is kind of cool. So this is kind of like, if you want to set up a new React app, a new React on Rails app, this is kind of really what you're going to do. So let me, made like a little video. Okay, so I'm going to make a new Rails 5.1 app. And let's go into the directory. Let's edit the gem file. Let's put in React on Rails. I put in the specific version of React on Rails because it's really important that the version of the gem in React on Rails corresponds to the version of your NPM library because they have to be in sync. So great, now we run the generator, Rails generate React on Rails install. And now we will run bundle and yarn. And we'll run foreman start procfile dev. And that kind of runs both the compilation of the files and your server. Here's your little hello world here. Hello Pivotal Labs. And that's an example. Well, if we get some time a little bit later, I've actually got this running, running here on the browser. I just only have a few more slides too, so definitely want to save some time for some interaction, Okay, so how does this all work in React on Rails? You have to put in this this asset helper here, JavaScript pack tag. This is actually the same name as the WebbPacker one. It's the same concept, but it's not using the WebbPacker gem. It's using my fork of the WebbPacker gem. And so you just put in here, Webpack bundle. You want to render this React component. This is what you do, is you have the name of the React, the component you want to render, and you will pass it some props, and you could say pre-rendering false. And with only client rendering, kind of this is what it looks like, and by default in development mode, we'll log kind of what happened there, which is kind of cool. And the way it looks here in, how does this actually look if you go look at the HTML? Well, you can see here's that asset helper. And then right here's a little bit of setup code that the library uses so that we will run your JavaScript and boom, put that component on the page. Notice the key thing here is that there's just one line placeholder. So for the component, there's no server rendering here. And the other thing to notice is that the data that's going to initialize this component that came from a Rails app is placed here in the script application JSON tag. Now, if we want to turn on server rendering, all we got to do is set pre-render to true. And now the browser console shows that we actually did server render. So we do echo the actual server-side logging on the browser console as well to make it even easier for debugging. And so if we looked at the HTML source, you'd be able to see here that instead of a one-liner, you actually have the full HTML. So going back to the whole happiness theme here, how many of you know what jack shaving is? You guys ever use that term? I use the term all the time. I think the key to being an efficient developer, so I've pretty much trained all of the team members of Shaka Code, and what my team members tell me is that maybe I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I have a really good ability get out of yak shaving land by basically print statements, putting in a binding.pry in just the right state place in a Ruby library, and just getting in there and just not getting stuck. And it's there's another saying that what's the difference between a junior developer and a senior developer? Anybody want to take a guess? The senior developer knows what to Google for. It's true, isn't it? So one of the things I've put in, I've put into the React on Rails gem, since the beginning over the years is I'm going to do everything I can in this gem to prevent people from yak shaving when they're developing these apps. The very first thing that actually came about was server, when you're server entering, because if you don't have really good messages about what's going on in integration with the JavaScript, embedded JavaScript, because when you run embedded JavaScript, you don't just log stuff to the console. It doesn't work like that. There's a lot of magic in the React on Rails gem to make sure you get good error messages. This is one of the things about developer happiness for me is that I get a lot of fan mail on this, and that's been really great. So, here's one of them that, I just basically, I wish all error messages were this good. I actually started collecting all my fan mail and my kudos, a little page in my repository there so people can go there and they can see, hey, is this thing really for real? Supposedly I was supposed to keep that if I ever have a bad day, I'm unhappy, I'll just go look at the things people said I was good at, but that hasn't actually happened. So, I also have a projects page as, let me see. Did I just miss a page? Oh, okay, later on. I'm going to show you I have a projects page as well. So fast feedback is happiness. Originally in the React on Rails, the first examples of using React on Rails, we actually showed just only using your client directory and just not even using the Rails server to kind of do fast iterations. It turned out that was kind of sort of inefficient, and nowadays what we later on we figured out was how to do hot loading within React on Rails. So you change something and boom, just change on your screen. The other thing we're doing nowadays with our client projects is using React Storybook. So we're developing components using Storybook for very quick iterations, and then that just goes right into your React on Rails app. Here's some things I'm just mentioning in terms of happiness that we support is, React Hot Loader, you can configure the DLL plugin. Another thing for avoiding yak shaving, if you want to avoid yak shaving and you're using open source libraries, do you want to pick the really popular libraries? What are some reasons you want to pick the popular libraries? If you Google an error message, it might actually show up. That is 100% the case. Because, yes, if you do obscure stuff, there won't be any matches in Google. So React on Rails, we're definitely pretty popular at this point, and there's, so we do have a very active community behind it. We've got a lot of projects on using React on Rails, and this is just a small sample because this is a true story. I was going to go to RailsConf. I got a hotel room, but then I didn't get invited to speak, so I decided I wasn't going to go. But I reserved a hotel room. I was going to cancel. I go, you know what? I bet somebody else wants this conference discount. So I tweeted out there. Some other speaker forgot to get a hotel room. He calls me. We get in touch. I go, hey, you heard React on Rails? And he goes, I think we're using that in my project. And sure enough, they were. He was a back-end guy, but that's I meet people all the time that are using it. One of the things in the Rails doctrine, progress over stability is happiness. And I release changes, updates all the time to React on Rails. And how can I do that? Well, I can do that because basically we built React on Rails, a gem, just like we do our client projects, meaning that we have really good CI on it. And I've even got the bell and suspenders. I've got both CodeShip and Travis running on it, which it's interesting. It kind of sometimes brings up little issues here and there. But we've got our generator, the tests the generator. How do most people test a generator? Maybe you got some little unit tester. We have full integration tests on our generator, meaning it actually makes new Rails apps. Have you seen that, Michael? What we did?
It's clear that if you don't do that, things will break.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's clear that if you don't do this, things will break. And this is, what is developer happiness? You ever get on a project? It's like, man, I want to merge this to master. I don't know what's going to break. I got 2 steps to test manually, but I know that's not enough. So we have like, even automated tests. It actually runs a generator with all the different options, adds actual tests to the generated apps, and made sure those tests pass. And that actually goes into our code coverage metrics as well. And that's just the tip of the iceberg for what we do. And because of that, I constantly release new versions of React on Rails. The other thing, too, is we have a very active community, so if I do break something, someone tells me very quickly. I do hope people upgrade soon to version 8. I still have probably a little more documentation to do. One of the great things about the open source is I've had an insane amount of contributions to the community, especially in terms of the documentation. Although it would be even better if some people would help me more on the WebbPacker part of it, which is really new, because I do think people are a little bit scared of that. So there's a very comprehensive changelog. Anyway, so I just wanted to kind of, revisit this, Rails doctrine. I just want to make sure, I hit all these points, because I just thought it was kind of cool. I actually wrote an article on this, the React on Rails doctrine, because when I read this over, I go, you know what? And this article came out long after I was setting up React on Rails, but I set up React on Rails with the philosophy of Rails. Then David wrote about it. I go, you know what? Boom. We did a lot of this stuff. So I think you all agree, I've optimized React on Rails quite a bit for programmer happiness. And part of happiness is also efficiency of development, support the right libraries. I optimize it for my happiness because I can release stuff all the time, and I don't worry about breaking stuff too much. Convention over configuration. React on Rails has a few very simple conventions. Put all your client stuff in your client directory. Nowadays, just a few little knobs here and there to tweak your Webpack, do your Webpack setup, and create a manifest, and boom, and you're done. The omakase menu, it's mine and my team and the community, and I get to be the benevolent dictator, which is kind of fun. So, but I'm okay, doing okay, right? With my pick so far. There's no one paradigm. I think like that one there, you kind of can think about it that, you could put whatever you want inside your client directory. There's a few very minimal things you got to do. The beautiful code stuff, I mean, hey, I think the organization is simple, but also take a look at the code inside the React on Rails gem. This is code that, I've kind of, I've been programming over 20 years, and this is the same code quality we put into all the projects that Shaka Code does. So I wanted the open source to be an example of the kind of work that my team and I do. Provide sharp knives. I really like that one, because my idea of a sharp knife is let developers use Webpack however they want and not try to hide Webpack from the developers. WebbPacker right now really encourages people just to kind of do convention or configuration and put your entry points in your packs directory so you don't touch Webpack config. Different philosophy there. I think you gotta understand how to tweak Webpack. There's just no way around it for a production app. Value integrated systems there. I think, take a look at how easy it was for me to set up a new Rails app with some JavaScript using Webpack and ES6 and all that stuff. The progress over stability, kind of mentioned I release fast, and pushing up a big tent, I guess it's kind of like, you can do whatever you want, within the scope of React on Rails. I think it's cool that Rails has finally adopted. They figured out that Webpack and ES6 and stuff was definitely where the world's going. So that kind of that inspired me actually to make this huge round of changes recently to use WebbPacker, because the original version of React on Rails, we packaged up everything and we stuffed it through the asset pipeline, and nowadays it goes straight from your Webpack build right into your public directory. And there was a little bit of work there that I realized that, there's this plugin for Webpack, make this manifest file, and then I actually kind of diverged from WebPacker and adjusted the helpers to my own needs. So, WebbPacker, I mentioned this really briefly. WebbPacker, the philosophy is you don't need to configure, actually that's typo there, it should say Webpack. React on Rails, sharper knives, more hardcore. So if you think you're more hardcore, go for React on Rails, I guess. You can use React-Rails now with WebbPacker. Go take a look at the issues that they have there and compare it to React on Rails. I encourage you, because that's, some people are saying, oh, this is way more official. Look, I mean, do you realize I'm competing against the React.js organization? That's crazy, right? Why would I compete against React.js? Why would I compete? Who goes and forks active support, right? Why would anybody have like the craziness to do that? So this kind of goes with our run with the herd mentality, is run with the herd, but if you're not going to run with the herd, be ready to support it and really know what you're doing. And, that's why I kind of feel like I'm at the level and my team's at the level. Hey, we'll fork open source stuff when we need to. We have no problems. We have no problems working with the open source folks. So once again, I want to, avoiding yak shaving is happiness. And I want to bring up some other community stuff I do to help people out. One is we have our forum. So I've been doing this for a long time. Thanks to Discourse folks. I have a Shaka Code Slack room. Email me. This is, I see Chad from Pivotal on here. And I invite people all the time. Just, email me and tell me a little bit about yourself. We got some nice discussions. We have a coaching program. This came about because we had a startup client that didn't want to do a full services engagement to us. So we set up basically a little support for $1,500. We'll set up a private Slack channel for you, and we're there for you. Ask any question. And if it's really just small little questions, we don't even dock you for the time. And otherwise, we give you up to 10 hours of like private pairing and stuff like that. Yeah. So, and one other thing that we do as part of that is, one of the things we do pull request reviews. Great way to help people out. So finally, this is my last slide on this. This was really influential. I'm a big fan of Jeff Atwood, for like the discourse. Stack Overflow, right? Who could be a developer without Stack Overflow a few years ago? He had this quote in there. I'd be lying if I didn't admit there's an element of selfishness at work here. He's talking about the meaning of coding horror. I love computers and programming. I love it so much it borders on obsession. When I saw the movie Into the Wild, I was transfixed by the final note written in the margins of Dr. Zhivago by a doomed Christopher McCandless. Happiness only real when shared. And that's really... that's been my true payback for React on Rails, is just, having this incredible community of friends I've met from literally all over the world. It's literally brought me my team at Shaka Code. Everybody I've hired at Shaka Code, we've never done a whiteboard job interview. All we do is... just someone says, I want a job with Shaka Code. I just say, go work on our open source, come up with some, issue, pull request idea. I'll give you some ideas. And I think what's cool about it is that if you can understand Ruby on Rails really well, and you can understand React really well and Webpack really well, I didn't have to ask you to reverse a linked list 3 different ways. So that's been really fun. I mean, there were some people, though, that kind of said they wanted to, but they didn't get very far. So I don't know, maybe they lost interest or maybe they didn't understand all that stuff. So that's just been, when I wake up every day and whenever I get these random emails from people saying that they love it, it's been truly, it's brought me a lot of happiness just creating something and having this whole big giant community. Check out Friends and Guests. That's the app that my company is building. What we're doing with Friends and Guests is that the idea of that is that not only are we building our own product, but we leverage that into our client work. We're building, it's a marketplace for vacation rentals. And so, modern JavaScript app. And we will hopefully be able to copy and paste some code out of there and put it in like your client projects. And, well, you don't have to because it's our project, we're free to do whatever we want with our client work. And we can't do that with all of our client projects. Is that true for like you guys? Same thing. Yeah. I've got a place here. I got the idea for developing friends and guests. I'm working on getting a vacation rental permit for. I got a really cool place in Maui. This right here, I kind of is the office there, and we got a few different places for guests. It'd be a great place for people to have a little off-site meeting over there. I think Michael's going to come visit me too, right? Michael's going to come visit me. It's a little bit about me there. So yeah, now I'm just here to, I could, we go over any questions. I've got like live code here I have all ready for you. And, this is that React on Rails project. I did that install on. I can, show you what it looks like, like for example, like if you wanted to see the, what actually happened, like for example, like this file right here, for example, go away. Yeah. Yeah. Let's get questions. There must be some questions.
Well, I was going to ask about WebbPacker and like the difference there. You kind of covered it a little bit. Did you have any more you wanted to say about?
Yeah, about WebbPacker. What? Yeah. So the question is thank you so much for that question, by the way. WebbPacker versus like WebbPacker Lite. How many of you seen my WebbPacker Lite fork? Read me. It basically, and I wrote an article also on why in the world would I fork like the Rails core library and release a gem, right? It sounds kind of crazy. And the reason why is that, well, actually, so there was just like one of the issues, I think is a little bit of developer happiness issue, is that you ever work on something that's just too many cooks in the kitchen and nobody's agreeing, and you just want to get some code done and just show people? So that was kind of a big impetus for it. The other thing was I wanted to ship React on Rails with support for this, and I didn't want to wait for things to look sort of like the way I wanted them to look. And so I just go, you know what, let me just fork in whatever. And now I'm in discussions with possibly merging it back in, but we're not agreeing. So there's if you just go to the either React on Rails or WebbPacker Lite things, I would love for people to put their input in there. Like one of the big disagreements is that I believe that your Webpack, the requirement on your Webpack config is that it exports a simple manifest that goes name, actual file name, file name. That's it. I don't want to put in like, host names and stuff in the manifest. That should be the responsibility of Rails. I just, disagree on that. I want to keep things minimal in terms of what's required for people to use a library.
What's the counter argument on that? Don't want to do it? Or?
Oh, less Ruby code inside the library. I don't get it. I don't get it on that one. The other thing as well is hot reloading has always been something that kind of works on and off, and it's sort of experimental. And I believe I want to have two different proc files, one that turns on hot reloading, one that turns it off with an env value. And they're like, no, your value should be set in your config file, whether it's on. If I edit my config file, then I have like a change file in Git. Do I really want to do that versus an env value? Again, I don't know. I don't want to have any long. I don't want to spend any more time on those discussions. You ever get involved with it? Those are developer unhappiness when you keep discussing those things too many times. So anyway, we got a fork of it. But when you run the generator on React on Rails, it just puts WebbPacker Lite in your gem file. So. And you just go on to the WebbPacker Lite thing, and I would love to get it merged into WebbPacker. So then I say, oh yeah, React on Rails is just based on WebbPacker, underlying it. But unless they're going to make it sort of friendly for the library, it's really not that much code also. So there's no, is there any real reason to worry about that, I guess? It's got the same API. The config file is a little bit different. You know, just little things like that.
Is there any talk about it being a mode for WebbPacker?
It's not really a mode versus non-mode thing. It's
In terms of like if there's differences where you can change the behavior depending on whether or not you want this.
So the question is there like maybe an idea you would put a mode in it? Well, the mode is like what you would set in your config file, like whether or not you want the default for using the Webpack dev server to do your development files. So the Webpack dev server is basically like a little express server that will give your JavaScript and your CSS files. And that's what you use when you do hot reloading. Otherwise, what you do is you just build the files and they just get put in your public directory. And so my team sort of believes that unless you're trying to do hot reloading, you kind of don't really need the Webpack dev server. And, you know, because it's just more closer to production, just create the files. And there's some other ways to get fast building of your files with the Webpack DLL thing. So it's just like you say, it's like, you know, there's no easy answer, just differences of opinion. That's fine. I mean, so WebbPacker, it actually is like a very specific format for your app using very specific directories that a lot of people are kind of discussing and they're setting up. And you just don't have to create your own Webpack config. But what is the problem with all these systems where you don't have to do it and when you do want to do it then? Guess what? Kind of like, you ever see all like what happens when you have complicated inheritance versus just mix-in sort of philosophies, right? You know, so the idea, if you look at their README that says that if you want to change the Webpack stuff, you should try not to modify the files it generated for you. You've seen that? Yeah, and then to just add on your thing on top of that. And then you upgrade the library or whatever. Well, for one thing, it generated all these files, okay? So unless you rerun the generator again, you're not going to get it when you upgrade that. Okay, so can you really get by without understanding what's in those generated files? And then if you can't get by without understanding what's in the generated files, which are actually much more complicated than what we generate as the simplest possible example. That's the idea with kind of React on Rails with the generator, is we just create the simplest possible thing to get you going. But it's not what you would use in a production app, but that's fine. It's used to show you hello world. Then you go to the Webpack docs and you go nuts, or we're also building, you know, part of what my company's doing is we're building more sophisticated real world examples so that, hey, you want to do that, we'll show you the real world thing and we'll also support it. But it's also, it just doesn't make sense to kind of put some of the stuff belongs in examples, some of it belongs in libraries. And it really takes some judgment regarding which is which. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for inviting me.